The sheet metal shop on Industrial Drive in Hamilton, Ontario opens at 6 in the morning. Not 6:30, not 7, 6. The owner has kept that schedule for 23 years because his father kept it before him, and his father's reasoning was simple and has never required revision. The people who start before the world is watching are the people who finish before the world understands what happened. The shop fabricates precision duct components for commercial HVAC systems. It is not a famous business. It does not appear in any industry publication or Chamber of Commerce report. It employs 11 people. It runs 3 shifts. It has supplied the same network of American commercial contractors continuously and without interruption for 19 of its 23 years of operation. On a Monday morning in early spring, the owner's daughter, who manages the shop's logistics and customer accounts, arrived at 5:54 and found 17 emails waiting for her. Not from suppliers, not from the freight company, from American contractors. All 17 sent between 9 the previous evening and 2 in the morning. All 17 containing variations of the same question, worded with the careful politeness of people who are trying not to communicate the alarm they are actually feeling. She read the first 3. Then she walked to the back of the shop where her father was already running the first press of the morning and told him what the email said. He turned the press off. He stood in the quiet of the shop for a moment, the kind of quiet that only exists in a machine shop when the machines are not running, a particular and unsettling silence. Then he said, "Let me make some calls." What had created those 17 emails had not come from any supplier failure, any shipping disruption, any quality complaint, or any of the operational variables that produce customer anxiety in the normal course of a manufacturing business. It had come from Washington. From a statement made the previous evening, without preparation, without legal review, without notification, to a single one of the 47 trade and industry bodies whose institutional purpose is to be consulted before a statement of this consequence is released into the world where markets listen and contracts either hold or fracture. And somewhere in Ottawa, at the moment the sheet metal press went quiet in Hamilton, a response was already being written. Not drafted, not outlined. Written because the person writing it had known, with the certainty of someone who has spent a career reading the directional signals of economic confrontation, that this statement was coming. Not this week necessarily, not this month, but coming. And preparation, in the arithmetic of institutional statecraft, is the only variable that converts a crisis into an outcome. The response took 4 minutes to deliver. Washington has not recovered from those 4 minutes since. This is what happened. The statement that triggered everything was released at 8:47 in the evening on a Sunday. Not through the established diplomatic channel that bilateral protocol prescribes for communications of this weight. Not through the office of the United States Trade Representative, whose staff had not been consulted. Not through the National Security Council, whose senior director for Western Hemisphere affairs learned of the statement the same way the Canadian Embassy learned of it. Through a public post, unannounced, uncoordinated, carrying the full legal and diplomatic weight of a presidential declaration without any of the institutional architecture that exists to absorb that weight before it lands on the people it affects. The statement declared that Canada had been, in the precise language used, systematically exploiting the generosity of the American trading relationship for decades, and that effective immediately, the United States was initiating a comprehensive review of every bilateral agreement, every integrated supply arrangement, and every preferential access provision that Canada currently enjoyed. The review would be completed, the statement said, within 30 days. During the review period, American purchasing agencies and federal contractors were advised to identify and, where possible, accelerate their transition to domestic suppliers. Advised. Not required. Advised. That single word would matter later. The statement was 891 words long. Ottawa received an automated diplomatic notification of its public release at 8:49. Mark Carney was reached by his chief of staff at 8:53. He asked 3 questions. The answers to those 3 questions took 11 minutes to assemble. At 9:17, he convened a call, and the response that would be delivered the following morning, in 4 minutes of public address, that would be broadcast simultaneously to every Allied capital that had been waiting, since 8:47 the previous evening, to understand which direction Canada intended to move, was fully formed in his mind before that call ended. What you are about to hear is the mechanism. And the mechanism, once understood, changes the way you read every confrontation that has come before it and every confrontation that will follow. Before you can understand the 4 minutes, you need to understand the ground on which they were delivered. Canada is not, in the conventional geopolitical framing, a large country. It is the second largest country on Earth by landmass, but its population of 39 million sits alongside an American population of 334 million, and this arithmetic of scale has shaped, for generations, the psychological posture that smaller parties bring to their interactions with larger ones. The assumption of the smaller party is that scale confers leverage. that the larger economy sets the terms, that the direction of dependency runs one way and is fixed. This assumption is the premise that the 4 minutes demolished. Not because it is entirely wrong. It is not entirely wrong. 61% of Canadian exports flow south. That dependency is real, and the people it affects know it. The sheet metal shop in Hamilton knows it. The grain elevator operators in Saskatchewan know it. The softwood lumber mills in British Columbia know it. But dependency in an integrated bilateral economy does not run in one direction. It never has. 83% of the electricity powering the homes and businesses of New York, Vermont, and Maine during peak winter demand originates in Quebec and flows south through transmission infrastructure that has no viable domestic American replacement in any timeline shorter than 11 to 14 years. Not 5 years. Not 3 years. 11 to 14. 44% of the steel inputs feeding the American defense manufacturing supply chain, specifically the grade classifications required for naval vessel construction and armored vehicle production, are processed through Canadian facilities at Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie. The American domestic capacity to replicate that processing at equivalent grade specification and volume does not currently exist. Building it, according to the most recent assessment of the American Iron and Steel Institute, would require between 6 and 9 years and capital investment of $31 billion. 91% of the potash that American farmers apply to their fields to sustain the corn and soybean yields that underpin American agricultural export competitiveness comes from Saskatchewan. One province, one geological formation, 60 years of harvesting. No alternative source at equivalent scale exists on the North American continent. These are not negotiating positions. They are not rhetorical claims assembled for the purpose of this confrontation. They are the supply chain reality of an integrated continental economy that has been building for 61 years, and they were the ground on which 4 minutes of public address would stand the following morning. The statement from Washington had been 891 words, built on the assumption that dependency ran one way. The 4 minutes were built on the knowledge that it does not. First, Carney convened, not sequentially, but simultaneously, the ministers of natural resources, defense procurement, agriculture, and finance, collapsing what protocol would normally structure as a series of bilateral briefings into a single 90-minute working session that produced, by midnight, a unified governmental position on every dimension of the American statement. Second, he authorized the release of a classified infrastructure dependency analysis that had been prepared 18 months earlier by a joint team from the Privy Council Office and the Bank of Canada, a document whose existence had not been publicly disclosed and whose findings, when selectively communicated to the ambassadors of 6 allied nations in calls placed between 11 in the evening and 1 in the morning, produced a response from each of those ambassadors that was, in its essential character, identical. They had not known. Not the full picture. Not the integrated dependency map that the document described, not the specific figures, not the 11 to 14-year replacement timeline for American electrical infrastructure, not the $31 billion cost of replicating Canadian steel processing capacity, not the 91% potash dependency. They had not known because it had not been in their interest, previously, to know, because the relationship had been stable enough that the dependency map was a background fact rather than a foreground instrument. It was now a foreground instrument. Third, Carney's communications team prepared, not a lengthy counter-statement, not a point-by-point rebuttal of the 891 words from Washington, but a 4-minute public address to be delivered at 9 in the morning, structured around a single organizing principle that would be expressed at its conclusion in 9 words. Those 9 words were not written the night of the statement. They had been written 3 months earlier, in a private notebook, as the answer to a hypothetical question that Carney had posed to himself during a preparatory session with his senior policy team. The hypothetical question was, if the confrontation comes, and we have done our preparation, and we are standing on ground that is solid, what is the truest thing that can be said in the fewest words? He had written 9 words. He had not used them yet. He used them the following morning. Her name is Patricia. She is 67 years old, a retired customs broker from Windsor, Ontario, with 31 years of experience processing bilateral trade documentation at the Ambassador Bridge Crossing, the single busiest commercial border crossing in North America, through which approximately 25% of all Canada-United States merchandise trade physically passes on any given business day. She retired 4 years ago. Every Tuesday morning, she has coffee with 3 former colleagues at a diner on Willette Avenue, a habit of 9 years, and they talk about the border the way people who have spent their careers at a particular place talk about it when they are no longer there, with the particular combination of expertise and distance that produces clarity. The Tuesday morning after the Sunday statement, Patricia arrived at the diner at 8:43. Her 3 former colleagues were already there. The television above the counter was tuned to a news channel, The sound was low. The four of them watched the screen without speaking for several minutes. Then one of her colleagues, a man who had processed commercial freight documentation for 28 years, said something that Patricia would repeat to a journalist 2 days later, a sentence that appeared in the third paragraph of a front-page story in the Windsor Star. He said, "They always think the bridge only runs one way. It runs both ways. It has always run both ways. We spent 30 years watching it run both ways." Patricia nodded. She drank her coffee. On the screen above the counter, a news anchor was indicating that a statement from the Prime Minister's office was expected within the hour. Patricia set her cup down and watched the screen. She had spent 31 years at that crossing. She knew what crossed in both directions. She knew the weight of it. She knew what stopped if the crossing stopped. She knew it better than any document described it because she had processed it, one manifest at a time, for 3 decades. She knew what the 9 words were going to mean before they were spoken. The consequences of the Sunday statement, in the 48 hours before the 4-minute response reframed everything, arrived in the predictable sequence of consequences that follow institutional uncertainty when that uncertainty touches integrated supply chains. The Canadian dollar moved 2.3 cents in the first hour of Asian trading on Monday morning. Not because Canada had done anything, because currency markets process political risk faster than governments can respond to it, and the Sunday statement represented, in the risk arithmetic of every currency desk monitoring the overnight session, an unquantified disruption probability applied to a bilateral trade relationship worth $1.1 trillion annually. By 6 in the morning, 3 American automotive assembly plants in Michigan had received formal inquiries from their Canadian component suppliers requesting written clarification of whether existing purchase orders remained valid under the terms of the American Review Declaration. The plants did not have answers. Their legal teams were still reading the declaration. The suppliers were not asking to cancel. They were asking for clarification. But in the supply chain management of automotive production, a clarification request from a supplier at 6 in the morning is a production risk flag by 7, and a production risk flag by 7 is a line supervisor conversation by 8, and a line supervisor conversation by 8 is the beginning of the kind of operational uncertainty that costs money before a single component is actually disrupted. The agricultural futures markets in Chicago registered movement in canola and pulse crop contracts by the time American trading opened. Analysts at 2 institutions described the movement in identical terms. Not a crash, a repricing of uncertainty, which, in commodity markets, produces the same downstream behavior as a supply disruption because the buyers who depend on supply certainty do not wait for actual disruption before they begin looking at alternatives. They look at alternatives the moment the uncertainty appears. By 8:30 Monday morning, the Canadian Embassy in Washington had received 43 formal inquiries from American industry associations, congressional offices, and state government trade liaisons, all requesting clarification of Canada's intended response to the Sunday statement. 43 inquiries in less than 12 hours. Canada had not yet responded. The response came at 9 o'clock precisely. Henry Kissinger, in the final years of his professional life, gave a series of private lectures to a foreign policy seminar at which several participants later described a specific observation he made about the nature of credibility in international confrontation. He said that credibility is not built in the moment of confrontation. It is built in the years of preparation that precede the moment of confrontation, and it is revealed, not constructed, when the confrontation arrives. A party that has done the preparation arrives at the confrontation holding something the other party cannot see until the confrontation begins. And at the moment it becomes visible, the confrontation is already over. He was speaking about Cold War deterrence doctrine. He was describing, with the precision of a man who had spent 50 years watching the same dynamic repeat across different theaters and different principles, the exact arithmetic of what happened in the 4 minutes at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning in Ottawa. Carney had not built his credibility in those 4 minutes. He had built it across a career that included governing the Bank of Canada through the financial crisis of 2008, governing the Bank of England through the uncertainty of Brexit, and spending the years between those postings developing a comprehensive understanding of the integrated dependency structure of the North American economy that no one who had not sat where he had sat could have developed. He arrived at the Monday morning podium holding something Washington could not see. It became visible in the final 9 words of a 4-minute address. The address was not long. That was its first communication. Length in a confrontation of this kind signals anxiety. A short response signals the opposite. It signals that the ground is solid enough that extensive explanation is unnecessary. That the position requires no defense because the position is not defensive. He described in the first 90 seconds the integrated nature of the bilateral economic relationship. Not as an argument, as a factual record. The electricity, the steel, the potash, The specific figures, stated without drama, in the flat clinical register of a man reciting known facts to an audience he trusts to understand their significance. He noted in the second 90 seconds that the Sunday statement had been received, had been reviewed, and had been found to rest on a premise that the factual record did not support. He did not characterize the statement. He did not describe its author. He described only the premise and its relationship to the record. He then said that Canada's response to the review declaration was itself simple and could be stated simply. He paused. Not for effect. Not theatrically. The pause of a man who has chosen his words with the care that their weight requires and is taking the moment before delivering them to confirm that the choice is right. Then he spoke the 9 words. We do not negotiate from positions we did not choose. 9 words. Read them once. Read them again. They do not argue. They do not threaten. They do not characterize the party that issued the Sunday statement. They locate Canada in a position, describe the nature of that position with precision, and decline in 9 words to accept the premise that the Sunday statement had attempted to impose. We do not negotiate from positions we did not choose. Canada had not chosen the position of supplicant. Canada had not chosen the dependency framing that the Sunday statement assumed. Canada had chosen, over decades of infrastructure investment and supply chain development and bilateral agreement architecture, a position of integrated mutual dependency. That was the position Canada occupied. And from that position, Canada did not negotiate on terms that misrepresented it. Those 9 words were shared 47,000 times in the first 3 hours after the address concluded. They were translated into 29 languages by the following morning. The German foreign minister cited them in a parliamentary address that afternoon. The Japanese Trade Ministry referenced them in a formal communiqué issued the same day. A former British Prime Minister described them, in a post that circulated widely through diplomatic networks, as the most efficient repositioning of a bilateral confrontation he had observed in 4 decades of watching international statecraft. 4 minutes, 9 words, delivered from ground that had been prepared not overnight, but over years, over decades, over the accumulated institutional knowledge of a man who had spent his career understanding exactly what crosses the Ambassador Bridge in both directions, and exactly what stops if the crossing stops. The sheet metal shop on Industrial Drive in Hamilton returned its 17 email inquiries by noon that Monday. The owner's daughter composed each reply herself. They were brief. They were professional. They confirmed that existing supply agreements remained valid, that production schedules were unaffected, and that the shop's commitment to its American contractor relationships was unchanged. She sent the last one at 12:17. Then she walked to the front window of the shop and looked out at Industrial Drive, the way her father had taught her to look at problems, not at the center of them, where everything is noise, but at the edges, where the shape of the thing becomes clear. What she saw at the edges was what had always been there. The work, the integration, the 19 years of supply relationships that did not exist because of a declaration or a statement or a review. They existed because the work was good, and the delivery was reliable, and the relationship was mutual in the way that all durable relationships are mutual, which is to say that both parties needed what the other provided. That mutuality did not disappear because of a Sunday evening statement. It was not the kind of thing that disappeared. It was the kind of thing that, when someone attempts to declare it absent, reveals itself most clearly. Trump had issued a declaration built on the premise that the dependency ran one way. The 4 minutes had named that premise for what it was. Not loudly. Not theatrically, not with the volume that mistakes itself for leverage, with 9 words delivered from ground that was solid because the preparation had been real and the knowledge was complete and the position was the one Canada had actually chosen, not the one Washington had attempted to assign it. We do not negotiate from positions we did not choose. The wrong country had been threatened. The 4 minutes had made that visible. And visibility, in the conduct of international statecraft, is permanent in a way that declarations are not. The declaration can be revised. The review can be suspended. The statement can be walked back through a dozen institutional mechanisms that exist precisely for that purpose. The visibility does not walk back. It is in the record now. 9 words. Permanent, in 29 languages, in the addresses of foreign ministers and the communiques of trade ministries and the private notebooks of diplomats who will be teaching this moment to the next generation of people whose job is to understand how confrontations actually resolve when one party has done the preparation and the other has not. We do not negotiate from positions we did not choose. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe my channel for daily updates.